Oh, very much so. Thanks ever so much for those pointers.
Yeah, the sad thing I found about the Internet Archive is the spidering can be patchy. So in the ideal world, you just point to the resource in IA, especially if it's something that's now out of date. But it doesn't quite seem to be that way. That's why you have to do a bit of poking around.
You're the best. Hi, Frode.
Hello.
How's your mom doing and the rest of the family?
Everyone is well. How about yourself? How's your mom?
She's doing good. We're doing a late brunch, so I have the cam off, so you won't be watching me eat.
That's a good thing. That's a benefit.
Yeah, just over a year since we lost Dad now, so that was really tough.
Yeah, the anniversaries are never good, are they?
Nope. Just a flood of memories. But luckily, most of them are good. He only had that really, really, really bad day the last day, so it's a blessing as far as that goes.
Yeah, it's bizarre what brings it back. So, I lost a friend on New Year's Day who died here in the hallway. And while we were trying to stop him from dying from his heart attack, we were doing the chest things. And at one point, I was trying to keep his feet warm with, massaging his feet and doing a thing on top. So I went to the physio today. I have a shoulder problem. And she was holding and she said, okay, let your arm go dead. And it was just so awful because, my friend, when I was trying to keep his feet warm, I noticed that they were completely limp. Like, if you have a massage, you can't just stop your body. So it was just brought it back. So yeah, Peter, I know random things brings back the worst things about those we have lost.
Yeah, that was how he went. He just suddenly went limp like a rag doll and fell over into the seat of the car. So just no warning.
Yeah, oh, it's bad. Hey, Fabian.
Hi, Fabian.
Hello.
Just finishing a sentence here on the website.
So by way of a progress update, I've been in JavaScript tooling hell for the last week. I must have had 12 to 18 different template variations for trying to get a project smoothly running with Electron, Vite, Electron Forge, or Electron Builder. And there's so many of them. And all the templates are just slightly different, so they don't want to work together when you try to merge them. It's been hideous. Once it gets finished, though, then I'll never have to think about it again. That's the one good thing about this kind of a project. Once it's working, then that'll just be the template that everything else I do spins off of, and I won't have to ever think about tooling again. But getting there is sheer torture.
As you say, never say never.
Right, until there's a new version update and everything breaks. And it happened twice already on this project. Minor updates to some of the tools. Oh, they seriously do not have a good story for dealing with incremental updates and version skew in large projects. It'd be nice if there was an intelligent linker librarian that could keep around a couple different versions of a function and only apply the best one that doesn't break and automatically test to see. And if it doesn't break and everything seems to be good, move to the newer version automatically. Otherwise, back off and use the version that's still working, unless there's a major security issue, and only then bring that to my attention. But it should be doing all that under the hood.
Boom. Okay, I just finished something here. Just share it with you guys because I need your opinion because you're a bit, what's the word, wonderful? Yeah, that's it. So I hope you have a big screen because otherwise this will be tiny because I have a big screen. I don't know if I've told you a million times.
I need a bigger screen.
I mean, working on this screen changes what the computer is to me. It's a crazy revelation. So if I may indulge just for a minute or two, I'll be very grateful. The supposed message of this is more future of text than who I am. However, it is actually now more focused about getting work at Apple, and I may apply elsewhere as well. So I have this cheeky, as we say in Britain, cheeky little link here to dialogue:consulting that I added today. And it says companies should do things. I was lucky enough to Esther Dyson replied to my email for help and asked me specific questions. So that's what I'm trying to answer here. But I'm wondering two things, guys. Number one is if you, whenever you can, if you have a look at the page in general, and then also we have here at the Future Text Lab, which is you, how that's presented, including the extended reality. The links to what we've actually done is a bit far down, so I'm not sure what you think. But yeah, any feedback from you guys would be greatly appreciated. It's even got pictures on it.
I might have demos as the top level menu link to take people to the actual projects. Sometimes when I hit a site, if I can't find the stuff, I'll move on before digging through. But if there's like a demo button at the top, that's the first thing I'll click.
So you're saying to move the XR stuff higher up?
Yeah, it should be above the fold.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything anymore. Because for two reasons. One is, I mean, it should be high up, no question, but I just find it interesting how that sentence doesn't mean as much anymore because of, you know, hugely different size monitors. Therefore, a very different idea what the fold is. And also, as Brandel has done on the Apple, oh, there he is, on the Apple website, they scroll forever because they don't want people to link. So there is that connection. Hi, David. Hi, Brandel.
Hey there. How are you all?
Yeah, okay. Okay-ish. I was just asking the gang, and now including you guys. I'm looking to get some work. So this Future of Text website is now tooled a little bit around that. And Brandel, you know, I'm trying for a job at Apple, right? In my surreptitious way, right? So I got an email from Esther Dyson last night asking me very specific questions, which was very useful. So what I've done is added a section here called Consulting, where I'm trying to answer those questions of what can be delivered, which needs some work.
A quick one, Fred. If you use any of the links at the sidebar, there's no link you can press to take you home. I mean, I know there are ways you can figure out how to get there, but there isn't a clickable link, and that's
the logo.
Right, but I wouldn't have guessed that.
Okay, no, I'm not saying it to be annoying.
No, sure. I mean, so it's there. I stand corrected. Is it?
No. Don't stand corrected. I wouldn't want you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the logo would be fine. I just think it's probably useful if you've got some way to sort of, because I was thinking, wait a minute, have I missed something? And I was thinking, how do I get back to that screen I saw before? And then I realized each of the side links was effectively a subcontainer, and that, you know, which is fine.
Of all the things you are, Mark, one of the things you are not is stupid. So I think that observation is worthwhile. So just add it like this.
Yeah.
And have it without a bullet point, so it even more feels like the top page, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Yes, if there are any thoughts at whatever point, it will be greatly appreciated. Right before you joined, Brandel, it was funny. Peter was saying something should be above the fold, and then I remembered what you did with the Apple pages, which are long, massive scrolling thing now because you don't want people to click on links, and also the hugely different screen sizes. So I thought it was funny how that phrase has changed lately.
Yeah, it is. While screen sizes are different, it is still possible to create something that is explicitly above the fold by being aware of characteristics of the page. In practice, what I see is that most people scroll some, but it is possible and important to indicate to them that they can and should scroll. And in fact, one of the cardinal rules for that is breaking content in such a way that makes it clear that there is some reason for scrolling beyond the first sort of screenful of it. And so designers' desire to have a pleasing and aesthetically complete top of page is actually at odds with the impulse and the necessity to get them to begin that process of doing scrolling.
It's funny how pages.
It's very hard for them to stop it.
Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
It's just very hard for them to stop it and to intentionally break a design by making a screen full, very obviously visually incomplete at the top.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, it's ironic how sort of, we got to the point that, we went through sort of, now people write better structured HTML and we have sort of pages that can cope with different screen sizes. And now we're in a different design hell where you now have to sort of consider the very factors you've just made. So, you can write all the stuff in a page and it will render on any screen and it will meet all these other things, and it's still wrong because actually the visual design now doesn't work, which probably when you sat down to write a bit of text wasn't actually your primary concern. So it always bites.
So here's a question, guys. Fabian and I have been talking a bit about the demo day and trying to coordinate with that, but also the next future of text. Who would come to Norway? Oh, the stunning response. Okay, we have one yellow. We have half. So
I didn't understand the question.
I'm thinking of hosting the next future of text, not in California, not in London, not in Southampton, but in Norway.
Oh, wow. Okay. When?
When is a really good question, actually, because we've usually been following Bint Surf's schedule, and it tends to be October, November, but October, November is not as pleasant in Norway as something like July, where there's a little bit of warmth left.
Right.
So that's a good point. I'm going to be in Norway next week, so I'll look at some opportunities there. But yeah, it could be good to get away from it all for a few days, maybe.
I'd certainly happily go. It's a question of whether it's all about timing, but in principle, yes. I always enjoy visiting Norway, so that's not a problem.
Nice.
Sounds good. Which watch is that, Brandel?
This is the 5. They give them to me when I sell them. But the last watch that I was involved in selling was the Series 5, so this is it.
Yeah, it's amazing how useful it is. And trying to explain to people, yes, I'm a text person, but speaking here to send messages, it's almost flawless now. It's absolutely.
Are those Apple watches or Android watches or what?
Apple watches. Yes.
Okay. I didn't know. I've never used one, so I don't have a sense of the usefulness. But that's really interesting to know.
Yeah, I don't use it for sending messages. I just use it for health stuff, basically. But it's very good
fantastic.
at that.
Tell my wife there's someone at the door. Which is actually what happened.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
What do you mean? Okay. Tell my wife there's someone at the door.
I'll send this.
Boom, perfectly written. Even
Oh,
with
wow.
the apostrophe. It is definitely part of the future.
You can actually use. Have you tried using shortcuts for that? You might be able to stitch together your IoT doorbell thing to send those messages automatically.
This is actually a really interesting topic. Are you guys okay if we talk about shortcuts for a bit? Okay, I don't need it because Emily and I, we both have Ring doorbell on our watches, so we get it. But the whole shortcuts thing is fantastic, and all the way back with Doug, with his command language, it was almost writing full sentences, and of course you could kind of save them as macros, which is what you're talking about. But can you introduce us to shortcuts for Mac or iOS today? Because I'm supposed to be the kind of person to use it, and I can't really see it being practical, which is very odd.
Sure. No, so shortcuts is a way of automating can't remember the name of the company that Apple purchased in order to make it happen, but it's a way of getting certain inputs of various kinds and turning them into automatic actions on the part of other applications. And so you can take specific messages from specific senders and then automatically send messages on the other side and do a range of actions, so that you could say turn on a light if a doorbell rang, or other things like that too. So and have conditionality. It's a visual language that you can configure from iOS and iPadOS. I'm not sure if there's a shortcuts app on Mac.
There is,
but it's interesting.
There is.
Cool. Yeah. So it has a substantial, if not total, scriptability in terms of being able to connect actions and impulses together. And yeah, so a lot of people have stitched together things in their IoT environments, their smart home environments, and I've been able to do it with communication. So for a long time, our school had a health check-in requirement every morning, and so when Heather and I were actually over in London for Future of Text last year, I used shortcuts to pass on the message to my mother-in-law that she needed to, as well as get our daughter ready in the morning to fill out the health screener saying that she seemed fine. And yeah, it was a really interesting sort of deployment of it, and my first such use one because I don't particularly bother using things that are convenient, and I don't particularly bother committing to memory how to make the most use of Apple sort of services and products, but this happened to be one such place where it was actually very useful.
It's interesting for many reasons. One of them is OpenDoc was so promising. I remember I had a meeting with Don Norman back a long time ago, and we went through it, and I said, what initial functions are you going to be shipping with it? Oh, I don't know. That's for the marketing department to decide. And then, sorry, it might be medical. Sorry, 1 second.
While Fred stops, I mean, one interesting thing I found, because it came up in another area, was the interplay between shortcuts, Automator, and Apple scripts that all seem to be playing in the same area. So of course on the Mac, shortcuts feels very iOS-y, which is unsurprising because it's come back the other way, and it's trying to figure out which is what. I mean, I know Apple scripts been on the sort of death march since about the turn of the century, but they haven't killed it off yet. I think because it's so deeply embedded in print, in the printing business. Yes, trying to work out which thing to use can be confusing at times, but I'm guessing for anything new like IoT, shortcut sounds the way to go.
Well, an issue, that's a really, really good point, Mark. An issue is not only the shortcuts have the same issue that OpenDoc has. It ships with almost no pre-made shortcuts. There's 11. So there isn't that much, to start with. But also the Mac is obviously an intensely secure environment, which means there's a lot of stuff we're not allowed to do. Even as a developer, I have to be in a sandbox. So of course, shortcuts could be great to automatically download all new ACM articles, run them through some basic checking for keywords, organize them, put them in this and that. Just doesn't seem to be possible.
Well, an interesting aspect in that, in terms of software being sort of cognizant of the fact it's used by humans, is a lot of these things would be better if they did, instead of just sort of basically silently failing, saying this is failing because you were effectively trying to cross a security threshold, and point you to things. It might be you can't get around that. It might be you could, but you need to do it in a different way. But at the moment, a lot of these things just fail silently. And so unless you know someone who's really clever at the back end, it's almost impossible to navigate around, because it doesn't work, but you don't know why it doesn't work. So you don't know whether to stop trying, or whether there is a tractable different approach. So I was talking actually with Dave Millard this morning about, you know, the number of systems that have failed because the tech was all right, but they just forgot to make it for humans. They just forgot that extra layer. You know, the number of people who want to who can or want to read data triples is vanishingly small. It's that same sort of problem.
So let's do a little bit more planning before we suddenly get into something interesting and takes us down. Fabian, what is the current thinking for Demo Day? Are we going to try for the Mondaneum?
I think it's a bit too far, too lost. So it would probably be safer to do it either again in London or in Brussels or even Paris, or but an easier to access place.
Mark, where's the next Hypertext conference? Is that Florida or Rome or somewhere?
This year it's Rome. It's Rome in early September.
So
I mean,
that could also mean, though, because you asked earlier about the conference in Norway, that it might be a bit too much, but it could also mean, let's say, conference happening for a day or two, and then building stuff like a day or two before, like especially for, I mean, if for me it's in Norway or Rome, it's not next door, but it's relatively close, so I don't mind so much. But if people travel from all around the world, that might also be something to consider to do both at once. Of course, intellectually, it's a bit demanding, but at least we're sure that people who care about the topic are there.
yeah, no, exactly. Brandel, are you going to the Hypertext conference? Not really 100% your street, so that's why I'm asking.
I wasn't thinking of it or aware of it. When and where is it?
September, Rome.
I've just put some details in the sidebar.
Have you registered already, Mark?
I don't know it's open yet. I'm working on a paper with Dave Millard, and I'm probably.
I want to work on a paper with Dave Millard.
Because I also sort of clicked something that said "Will you?" and I realised I think I'm now involved in the program committee, so I should probably have to pay a bit more attention anyway.
Perfect.
It's very likely that I will go to W3C TPAC, the Technical Plenary and Planning Architecture Committee meeting, but I'm not sure if the venue has been decided. It was in Vancouver last year, which means it's likely to be either in Asia or Europe this year. So that's something that I will do. I was planning on going to Japan in July for giggles, just as a holiday. Yeah, I'm not sure. Hypertext could be a valid thing to go to. I don't know enough about what my team's plans are at this point to be able to commit one way or other, but it's certainly I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So now that the Apple headset seems to be delayed again to later in the year, and you know, we had this really urgent, hey, let's get things written down before the Apple headset last year, which we did. I guess it seems to be a little bit back and forth in the community, but we are pretty much focused on XR this year as well, right? And should we be more explicit about that? Maybe XR and education, or what if people feel? And lots of thinking going on. Making some links bigger here on the website, sorry. Because it might be useful to think more about you know, the purpose of the lab and what we're actually trying to kind of construct this year. You know, it's always been, let's have a good dialogue. Let's try to do a journal, which kind of seems to change, you know, depending on availability of people and things and all of that stuff. And then it's, let's get it into the book. The next Xerox Park. No, next next Doug's lab. Augmentation Research Center. That's what we want. Boom. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there, Peter. But you know, when we look at what we actually did produce for VR last year, it wasn't actually that bad in the end. You know, we did things here and there, and then we kind of I got a bit stressy about let's have a big finale, which never happened. And I think that's totally legitimate because we learned why the issues and limitations were around that, and we still got something particularly good. Specifically from you, Fabian, what you built and what you keep doing is, you know, just quite simply really valuable. So if we want to have a little bit more of a focus on that this year, because there did seem to be a good response to our kind of conversation around considered discussions that we had a month ago or so. Maybe we should try a few more of those, but we should make it clear that we are, you know, maybe it's a specific focus on XR environments for that kind of work. Because one thing that has become really frustrating for me is exactly what Brandel, sorry, was talking about a little while ago, all the different Mac, you know, technologies. And then Mark was asking, what are these three? Are they different or not? Point is, there's so many different environments. Some things I feel really should be done natively. A lot can be done on the web. But when I compare working on my laptop and working on this screen, they really are two different media. The fact that it both runs off the same piece of hardware on the computer here doesn't make that much of a difference. So if we're going to try to build for something this year, I think we need to define clear what it is. That was a lot of rambling. Thank you for your patience, Mark.
So you've got physical view specs now. In your
Yes.
phone and your Mac.
Yeah, there was something. Oh, this is so cool. Thank you, Mark. But just really quickly. So I mentioned I have a problem with my shoulder. So I went to see some doctor today who used one of those ultrasounds to image and find out that things are broken and so on. But having a discussion with her, because she showed me the screen so I could better understand myself, it became really clear that when looking at that kind of information, if it's just static, it has almost no meaning. It has to be interacted with in order for her to make a mental picture out of it. Isn't that a wonderful analogy for what we're talking about with text interactions? I'm going to try to change the color on a web page now while I'm listening. That's the way you get me to shut up.
Good luck.
Thank you.
So I'll pick up on something you thought about, you know, sort of following on from last year, and it occurred to me that something that I find sort of comes up in talking to people outside this sort of forum about, you know, what we've been doing is just some of the seemingly in this context trivial seeming things we've learned, but just maybe it might be useful to pick up some of those and restate them so they can travel further from this sort of conclave. In terms of, I just sort of the sense of the reality of the environment for those who've not tried it, the fact that actually there's an awful lot of construction work. What you can imagine and what you can do quickly are quite difficult, and that the tools are comparatively immature compared to other places. And I thought one of the interesting things I sort of took away was the fact that not necessarily by design, but if you've got say a cleanly structured web type bit of information, be it a web page or some sort of data that's tractable on the web, you've probably got something that's suitable to feed into this new environment. And it's little bridging things like that sound, well, they seem so obvious after the fact, but a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know that. And so that's something we could perhaps usefully do, is sort of slightly mine back into last year and just restate some of these things.
Yeah, I think that's useful. And to that, I would add that the last couple of years have reinforced to me how sorry the state of people's understanding of comprehension is. Their understanding of what it is that understanding text is and how it comes about. And that's also come about by simply realizing how poor most people's appreciation of their own mechanical process of reading is. I have a coworker who believes, right or wrong, that she takes in a picture of a paragraph holistically rather than following the glyphs or the words or the sentences. She also has pretty poor memory, long-term memory, and I wonder if perhaps those two are related. Adler and Van Doren wrote How to Read a Book 50 years ago, and I'm not sure if the sort of the contemporary fallout is too strong a word, but the contemporary reception of it was as perplexed as it appears to be whenever I suggest that might be a valuable book for a person who technically finished school, because they believe that their capacity for reading is enough. And I think taken together, that is a pretty poor ground for people to understand that, one, reading is flawed and variable, and two, virtual reality affords some substantial opportunities to create benefits over and above any of the current media. So if you don't have, there's a classic marketing thing, is that you don't sell a drill, you sell the hole. That people have to be completely sold on the problem and the benefit rather than the product. And in that context, many people, in fact, even some significant proponents of VR themselves, aren't aware of the state or nature of the problems with relation to text and comprehension, even when they are ostensibly one's greatest allies, in terms of being a fertile ground for being excited about the technology. It's just like, give me another excuse and I'll be there. But whenever you talk about, like, well, let's talk about your reading, they're like, what's wrong with my reading? So that's interesting, and a challenge that I guess I wasn't really aware that I had to quite that same degree, that telling people how badly their brains work would be as political as it turns out to be, which, in retrospect, is somewhat obvious. But yeah, so I think that one of the challenges is that people don't like the ebook versus paper book discussion / debate / whatever you want to call it, is also proof positive of this, that many of the volleys that people will level back and forth are, often talking past each other, and neither side, to the extent that they exist, is particularly well equipped to provide a full context of what it is that their side sort of affords. So yeah, that's what I think.
Welcome to the last 15 years of my life. At least the frustration aspect of it. That's a really important point. And I see, David, you have your hand up, but just putting here in the chat, I don't know through what, but I got some kind of a journal thing today with a link to this guy. When you can, please have a look and see if I should invite him to speak to the group. He does diagrammatic stuff.
Sure.
David, please go ahead.
I'm on mute. Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said, Brandel, about people not really understanding how non-building, well, catalyzing really the building of an environment above the web page. But I think this could also apply to virtual reality and even a layer over virtual reality. But in the environment, we're going to allow people to decide whether or not their activity is tracked. And if it is, it still will be in full control of theirs. And I think besides being able to monetize your data, I think another thing that's really interesting is, well, okay, and beyond having it, really personalizing your experience, the other thing is really the potential for your data to help you understand how you understand, how, pointing out what your confirmation biases are, or, to what extent you're going to certain, the content that you're ingesting has a certain sentiment leaning, whether political or what have you. But I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from our activity data that with the right AI structures can tell us about how we're understanding.
You used a word there that I very much like what you said, David, but you brought up a word that I really don't like. Confirmation bias. I think it is an awful and stupid term because it is, every single thing we do will be biased on our previous understanding of the world and our ethics. If somebody has a really positive attitude towards other people, they will judge other people more kindly than someone who is paranoid. So that's another kind of confirmation bias. So one of the reasons I've been recently looking into a lot of the brain stuff that Brandel has been talking about is I want to find out a little bit about where personality comes from. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have confirmation bias. We just need to work together, especially with the young ones, to build good ones. There is a little story about if you're a skier, and being Norwegian, wearing my ski thing, going downhill, if you look at the trees, you're going to focus on the trees representing problems, and you're going to hit one. If you look at the snow and focus on the track in the snow, you're going to follow the track in the snow. So where you look is where you become. So confirmation bias, I think, is really, really important. Except for obviously when it's more scientific things and data things and that kind of stuff, that's a very small part of what we're dealing with. But when it comes to communication, like all of us in this community, we have very similar ethical philosophies, I think. None of us here are trying to stretch into what would it be like to think about it from a totalitarian perspective or whatever. So I'm just reflecting on how I think this is very much taking from Brandel, very much how we need to upgrade the language we use to talk about our language and thinking. The term confirmation bias, I think, is outmoded for that reason. Mr. Anderson.
Well, David, do you want to respond on this? Because I'm gonna go on off on a respond to something Fred was saying about metadata a moment ago. So I don't want to sort of derail the conversation at this point.
Okay, yeah, just really quickly, I'll say that I'm not at all tied to the notion of a confirmation bias. I'm more interested in us. I like the idea of new terms, but us having real metrics that help us understand how we're thinking and how, and also the character of the content that we're ingesting. So I don't know what the right way to say it is, but maybe there's, I'd like to know, well, to what extent am I in a filter bubble, or to what extent am I going down pathways that may not have substantiation? To what extent am I kind of ghettoizing my thinking? And am I in cognitive cages? How can can I measure the extent to which I'm in a cognitive cage? So I don't know what the right languaging is for these things, but I just think that our data can help us understand those things when we have the right tools. And I hope that will happen in the next 2 or 3 years. And thanks, Mark.
Just on the end of that, I would say two thinkers that I really, really love on this are Lisa Feldman Barrett. She wrote The Secret Life, was it How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. And another one is Gerd Gigerenzer. And I haven't found like a text-sized book of his work, but he's really amazing. He's been locked in a constant and at times pretty nasty battle with Amos Tversky, where the late Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, and I think he's mean, but he's really clever. So Barbara may not be his greatest ally, but has a lot to say about the sort of reflexive nature of the mind, and that, like you say, that cognitive bias, it sort of implies that there's something such a thing as unbiased in a way that there's no real evidence for, and Barrett sort of has a very good and even-handed way of carrying that across as well. I just found Gigerenzer did a talk at Google for 56 minutes 5 months ago, so I'm definitely going to watch that and report back. But that's me.
So we've kind of gone into a real topic now. We still have to talk a little bit more about what we're doing this year. Because I think, Randall, you wrote kind of the manifesto for the issue in what you said a few minutes ago. So I guess we're continuing these conversations. We'll try to have more guest presenters. If anybody has anybody from the cognitive brain type area, that may be very useful if they can speak to this. Surprisingly, many cannot, because they focus on a specific area, which is fine. They're just being intellectually honest. And then we're going to look at when to have the demo day, Fabian. We'll keep doing those emails, right, to figure that out. But for the demo day, that should be definitely VR focused. And we will all try to contribute something, even if it's a written paragraph. Ideally, it'll be some kind of code, but not necessarily, right? And then we will look at when to hold the next Future of Text. I guess I'll email Vint. Boom, okay, let's put a note. But it would be nice to have a little bit more structure around our conversations, because I feel a lot of what happens here gets kind of lost. I mean, if one of us turns out to be a Nobel Prize winner or we solve a big problem, sure, in the future, people will apply real things to figure out what we said over the years. But, you know, we tried the circle, we tried a bit of blogging, we tried a bit of this and a bit of that. We even tried last year to write articles, let people read the book and maybe reply to them. So there's a kind of a chain there. But I know I keep harping on about this point, but does anyone have any suggestions to shut me up with that maybe we can get to the next step, the next level? Because also, I'm going to share the screen again. There's, so I'm trying here to deal with this website. I realize when I'm sitting on this screen, this is really beautiful. And then you're on a 13-inch screen. And of course, that may be all that's seen. I have to check that. And, we're really much about that. But look at this. This is just author as is. And being able to think bigger, just on it's tremendous. Text can only be read comfortably at a certain size for certain people, depending on our visual system. So it does actually matter how much space we have. And I know I'm kind of hammering on a point that everybody agrees with, but the point is that maybe we say that we're going to try to work for something that has a certain minimum set of requirements. Or maybe we go the other way and say it should work on the Apple Watch screen too. Nothing wrong with that in theory. But how can we address organizing our dialogue along just dealing with the problems that Randall said, looking at our own, the functions of our own mind so we can understand each other better. Because in one sense, this is an echo chamber here. It's super lovely. I love seeing you guys every Monday. But, you know, we're not exactly arguing with people who hate the environment, who would like to re-elect Trump and think invading Ukraine is a good idea, right? You know, those are obviously the hard issues. Over.
So for the example you gave with the screen and the higher resolution, I would tend to think that it's not necessarily well, first, yes, we need minimum specification. That's not a problem, even though we need to remain inclusive, especially when we think of education. Like usually we think of kids that don't necessarily have the same prehension, knowledge, all this. But I'm wondering if the positive effect you felt, the extra room you get, is not necessarily the absolute resolution or size, but rather the difference between the previous setup versus the current setup. And that's usually, I mean, it's very nice because you get some like free room or some free space to think, and you think you have more space in between around it. So that's, let's say, some newfound freedom. But I'm wondering how much it has to do with, let's say, above a minimum threshold versus past versus current, and more of to give you new things to think with.
Mark, do you mind if I take this one?
They do. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. I think that is a phenomenally great question, and there's a PhD in there, I'm sure. I will approach it this way, because it really is so important. First of all, when the first Mac came out, you didn't need that many versions of Mac to have desktop publishing. And that was established in really good. And of course, over the last whatever years, desktop publishing has improved, but not by orders of magnitude. You could do it on that small screen. So I think you're looking at thresholds of, okay, now we have enough for this medium, or thinking, now we have enough for this, is really, really important. You're absolutely right that I'm now giddy with this new display because it's new and it's bigger. So what is the difference between what can be done here compared to my 13-inch or similar and full-scale Room VR? Absolutely important questions, because if you look at the leaked Apple patents for the reality headset, and you know, I don't know what's real or not, but they are looking at really interesting things like having a real screen, virtual screen overlaid the regular screen, being able to pull things out. Some of the things we've talked about over the last year. I don't know how they've dealt with assigning spaces that we've also talked about, because I'm completely sure that if, you know, like the map that you saw that I have, if I can use my entire room, yeah, of course I would probably have a wall over there that would be the lab, you know, like the typical murder wall that's kind of ambient. So to start looking at the thresholds for different usability, you know, starting with something like a watch, because a watch should be part of the environment too, right? Obviously it can't do the same, but you should be able to move things through these access points. Yeah, no, that's a really good question there, Fabian. Maybe that should be just part of our testing. Because some people would say that, you know, you don't need VR, all you need is a nice big monitor. Vince said that to me a few times. And of course, he's completely right to a certain level of workflow. So what is the other workflow above that? And I don't think we've been very successful in modeling what those additional workflows can really be. We've been relatively abstract, because even the idea of having, as Peter talks about, a library, you know, it brings with it challenges and opportunities that you can only really address by trying it right now. Anyway, great question.
I just on that same thing, because it seems to chime with something I sort of just typed in the side while you were replying, which is that in terms of thinking, you know, should we build or design for this or that, I'd sort of turn it around and say, and sort of reaching back to what Brandon was saying earlier, well, if we begin to understand our textual output better, be it spoken or written, is to look at the interface between that. So rather than design for a thing this size or that size, saying what is the sort of the dynamic constraint imposed by the different size. So in other words, you're sort of shimming between the two, because otherwise I think you actually unintentionally end up overfitting for one thing, which is fine until a very different thing comes along, and then there's a massive sort of do-over, unintentional. So it's the same thing, but just shifted to a slightly different perspective, which in turn links to the thing really I was going to mention, which is just that, well, I may be actually starting a job soon, sort of a mostly part-time job. It's just academic, so it probably won't cover the bus fare, but we'll see about that later. But it's actually doing some stuff for physical sciences, mainly chemistry, who are having another go at making sort of automated lab books and things. But the conversations of pre-meet I had with the team was really interesting, because they were talking about they cottoned on to the fact that their problem wasn't really that they could write down, you know, how many ions of sodium reacting with how many ions of something else. It was actually the outer level of the metadata, the more human level. Why did you bother to do it in the first place? Otherwise, so we've become very good at measuring measurable things, and we've become very good at building sort of databases that store measured things. But they're normally most tractable to the people who made them. And yet we have this conceit that by, you know, if we gather enough stuff, somehow serendipitously some wonderful thing will come out of it. And I would say by and large, that's actually not proven to be right. And I sense, and I look at the sort of failure of things like the Open Data Institute, which was a big bit of hoopla when I was starting my master's back in 2013, and they're sort of gone nowhere, because it did exactly that. It gathered lots of linked data, but then failed to present it in a way that anyone who didn't make it could use it, because the number of people who can use these very abstracted systems and data is vanishingly small in the overall population compared to the number of people who actually might do something usefully with it. So that there is this, that I more and more see this as an inner and outer layer as you move things around. So there's almost the nuts and bolts level that, you know, this box to be on this screen has got to be this many pixels tall, or it's got to be a, you know, has to be a shape primitive of this type. As opposed to the other missing part, which is not necessarily self-evident after the moment of its creation, as to why that was, you know, a cube and not a sphere, and why it's there and not there. I'm probably expressing that in rather vague terms, but
no. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I'll shut up then.
No, don't do that.
No. I mean, you know, so I just don't want to monopolize conversation. That's all.
Yeah, no, those are really important points, and it kind of reminds me of the way that a number of right-wing administrators sort of fail to administer, and then say, "Hey, look, this can't be administered, and it's a failure of a program." It just like if you're not looking at the right primitives, for want of a better word, then you will fail to capture them, and then you'll conclude that they're uncapturable. Something that was really cool that got presented at Apple internally recently, not to give away secrets, is that the research at Apple division made a really great presentation on how to present research at Apple. I'm not sure if it was based on research, but it was a really wonderful and pragmatic presentation of how to put information on a slide, left side and right side, and if that's an appropriate construction for building expectations, and how to build up a sort of a repeated structure so that there's a common frame of reference between all of the different studies or findings or observations. And you know, Apple doesn't publish stuff like that, unfortunately, so it probably won't make it out. Its mere presence, I think, is something that most people would not blanch at and legal for my disclosing. So that information like that exists. Likewise, there was a really wonderful presentation in 2013 called "How to Give a WWDC Presentation." It was one of my favorites as well, because it covers, you know, the do's and don'ts of don't hint at functionality that we haven't released, because Apple doesn't do that, but do talk about what it does, and don't talk about what it doesn't, because because they'll know, they'll learn. But those things are really really interesting as indicators of the missing layer of mechanics between sort of between information and presentation, and it often ends up being kind of colonized by salesy places and people in a way that's pretty unfortunate, because we all have to do it. And I was sort of talking to my daughter about this recently, about how once you sort of accept capitalism, then the capitalism frame can seem inevitable, and it can seem like the primary or sole way through which to view things, like the idea that people do stuff and it's jobs and they get money. But it's actually not. That people had things they did, they had professions for as long as there have been too many things for one person to do. But that's not the same thing as being the capitalist lens is the only and inevitable one to apply to the concept of specialization. And then in that same way, like people say, like, everything is sales. Like, no, it's really not. Everything's not sales. Everything's philosophy too. So yeah, to that end, like having a basis on which to keep people's minds open about what discourse and discursive, like, presentation of ideas is beyond the sales context. It's actually harder than I thought, and really important.
When it comes to not telling people what it isn't, that's a big issue with creatives too. I know so many photographers, when they show their work, they immediately start saying what's wrong with the picture. You know, and the advice is, shut up. Let people look at the picture. If they see something they don't like, you know, or unless later on you have some technical discussion, fine, but shut up. It also as bad as telling why the picture is wonderful. You know, people want to be able to judge for themselves. So
it's interesting, that aspect of, you know, you said that sort of let people judge themselves for the picture, because one of the things I sense is the closer we come to very pictorial, very visual things like VR, I think we butt further up against the fact that our internal pictures are probably very different, even if our speech is reasonably aligned. So in other words, trying to build systems, or build structures that make sense to everyone is possibly more complex than we may be assuming at the moment. We sort of did it through the narrow gateway of the printed page and things, and that seemed a wonder of its time. But I just sense for all the things that don't quite mesh, I dealing with the sort of tools for thought community all the time as I do, is the thing I constantly see is it's a natural tendency to work back from the beautifully imagined picture in your mind, and we really struggle with the notion that another sensible, intelligent person who is broadly, aligned in intent with yourself does not have that picture at all, or may visualize what you describe completely differently, and that's really problematic when we begin to talk about, intuitive. Well, obviously it works that way. Well, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Fabian, please.
Yeah, I'll briefly share my screen for a couple of things. Some that starts maybe a bit far-fetched, but hopefully will look back clearly.
Am I going to see your screen big now? I'm excited.
Can you see my screen?
Nice table.
So I've made that table, so I'm pretty proud of it. I welded. Well, I cut a bunch of metal bars, like 6 meters or so, and then welded it. Don't need the sound. Very proud of myself. And I don't know the name for this, but it makes sparkles, so that's of course very yeah, why do I show this is because initially when I did the workshop, I did not think I would be able to do this. I did not do all of it. Like the teacher was there telling me what to do, and when it was really hard, she was there to fix it, to explain a bit more. But that was very nice. And why do I show this is because it was a learning experience. And again, starting with like, I don't know how to do this, like literally have no idea. So I must trust the teacher there and her body of knowledge and her ability to transmit some of it to me. And a bit before this, so that was a week ago, I was watching this this presentation on reading. So it's I was actually roller skating while listening to that thing, to the presentation, which I thought in itself like was mind blowing. You can listen to state of the art on pedagogy and reading while being moving around, learning another skill. And I mentioned this one because during the Q&A from that professor researcher, actually, somebody asked from the audience, as a teacher for young kids, trying to teach them to read, how can she do better, basically? And his answer was debugging all the way, meaning that you need to backtrack from the steps of the unknown. So like here, for example, with the table, do I actually know how to use any of those tools? Yes, no. If I don't, am I missing some concepts or safety or whatnot? But basically the conclusion from that researcher for reading or teaching how to read to kids, and I imagine it applies to most other skills, is being able to backtrack. So when you have, as a teacher, the sequences of steps you want the learner to get, then you need to be able to say, okay, this level has not been reached. I need this other older, or let's say dependency of a concept. And in practice, what I did for this today for music was plugging the MIDI keyboard. I think I've shown that last time with the little colors. And now the exercise part where it randomly picks a note, and then I need to do it again. And if I do it again, it's good. And it picks a random new note, and I need to do the same. And if I fail, so for example, here, I guess that's the first failure. I was supposed to do this this key, and I did another one. And I keep on trying until I do. But basically, that's a little bit the part where I'm thinking about at the moment. So that's not text, but it's still a notation system. And through interaction, being able to say, okay, I've done those good things, those bad things, do a bit of statistics on it. Mainly, I fail on this note, and then try to backtrack from there. What is the problem there? What is the mistake? Did I miss a concept? Yeah, that's been the last couple of days, actually.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is really awesome. And that phrase, debugging all the way, is really, really cool. Is that what the teacher said, or did you say that?
No, I said this because I have the computer science bias, but that's, yeah, my summarization of it.
Brandel, you need to talk to Apple marketing for the next Worldwide Developers Conference. That should be on the t-shirts.
Debugging all the way.
That's really, really good.
Yeah, it's a good line. I mean, it reminds me a lot of what Michael Nielsen and Annie Batushek have said about books and about memory. That memory is such a cornerstone of skill, because you have to be able to kind of do a trace back all the way, and you have to be able to kind of then reorient yourself and have that context restoration, which makes me want to follow Jim Holland and see what he's got to say about all of that stuff more recently. Anyway.
I'm going to ask you all to look at this, because I think in our discussion here, if you can help me, we can figure something out. So this is what I'm pretending to write for the world, but it really is for Apple and then some other companies after. But do you agree that these are the things, I'm talking about me, but I mean us as a community? Because if you disagree, I'd really like to know why, or if you'd like to expand or edit. So delivering these things, better interactions, infrastructures, and questions. There may be some typos in here. It hasn't been finished. What are your general thoughts? Question is, does the community differ from this?
Could you give a little bit more? So this is better interactions for the future of text, or for, how do you mean?
It's a good question. Better interactions with text and software.
Okay. Okay. And
Okay, no, hang on. That's a great question. It's not obvious here. Well, organizations which produces tools, something like that. How can I make that clear? That's a very good question. Yeah.
yeah, that does help. Yes.
Or maybe I should put that up here, but
Yeah, I guess it does apply to all of the different categories, right?
yeah.
And this is
But does it seem like the kind of general thing you guys are thinking about what you're doing in your own lives as well? Or does this seem like a shock that, oh my God, didn't realize how different we were?
it's very much aligned to what I'm doing, at least to a portion of what I'm working on for sure.
That's good. Fabian, does this look like what you're thinking about?
I was thinking that how could you have a way to demonstrate it? Like when I see better interaction, I would want in that paragraph to be able to either do directly, that would be the best, let's say copy paste, and then you have the reference like in Reader. But if the person doesn't have Reader, of course, that's not going to work. So maybe having a GIF or an animation of it, but basically that trying to make that more tangible, basically. And then it's easier to dream from there, let's say. So, wow, we did define new interaction that opens up so many possibilities. Thus, we can imagine making another novel interaction. But I would look for a way to make it, I understand it's about text, but still to show, to demonstrate it.
Yeah, no,
right there.
I agree with you. That's a perennial problem, of course, having enough information but being succinct. So in here, there's a link to the software where I here try to immediately show these are the benefits, the different benefits. And then when talking about the XR stuff, yeah, no, I agree. That's not the best page.
From the perspective of somebody who looks at stuff for Apple, for people, often in programming, but also in design, having really visual, really succinct representations of really small moments of innovation is valuable, because a lot of the time people's value is in being able to communicate really concisely what specific things they've come up with, and to be able to imagine that in a new context. And to that end, I actually wouldn't be too worried about the scope, like just the breadth of the context, and figure out what's the least you can say in order to communicate that. And if you think about the sort of Apple.com house style now of communicating text versus pictures, and I can send you, if you see people on LinkedIn who are human interface designers, for example, then you can track back to whatever their last portfolio was and see what it is that got them hired, because they have tended to, that's whatever that is what got them hired. Their last sort of visible public communique relating to their work, and it's got a lot of animated GIFs or big screenshots of very simple or stylized moments of how they solve a problem, and what kind of visual style they tend to solve it with, the sort of the nuances of those, and that those are idiomatically kind of not so completely different to what Apple's house style is. It's helpful but not essential, particularly if people demonstrate breadth. But yeah, it's if you've seen sort of looping GIFs of actions or a short example of diagrammed stuff, I guess the question would be like, was it that you would have intended to do at Apple? But I would say that most people don't read by itself. They tend to, yeah. So this is a good example. That's a nice thing to kind of represent.
Yes,
and
I'm trying to.
I'll try to find more
quickly. So I have a page here of little things and bigger things. So each one of them is a specific thing, and it's on. I don't know if that's the best example here, but thank you. I'll take that into account offline. This session is not really my job advice session, but I'm really grateful. So I will really think about that. In terms of the top messaging, this seems like the kind of things we all are concerned with, right? Especially the questioning and dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Can I jump in and just say something about the better infrastructures? You have helped develop, but develop is I think is constraining. I might say help enhance, develop, and integrate infrastructures as being a little more comprehensive about that, because Apple already has infrastructure. So maybe it's really about integrating or enhancing what they have.
Yeah, because I found my sort of mind hang out slightly on infrastructures. I mean, I it's not that I think that's wrong, but it also leads me to a place of rather sort of hard-edged, sort of concrete things, and I think and I know when you link through to that, you start to talk about visual meta, which is as much conceptual as it is something. I mean, its power lies in thinking what it can do, rather than saying, oh, it's written in something that looks like BibTeX or something, which is where a lot of people will go. And that's, I mean, I just don't know if there's a better word than infrastructures. I wish there was to sort of cover this. And I'm spacing at the moment on that. So it's not that I not that I think that's wrong, but I'm something that just covers moves beyond sort of building hard-edged things.
Okay. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind as well. And then I have another question for you guys. In terms of understanding more about us and this year, are there anything here that you yourself would make a major change with if it was you who was listing consultings? What here do you kind of either think is really boring or not important, or what is missing for yourself?
For me, ethical things are missing, like how text is used, who gets to publish, how people review it, is there accountability, does your text stay with your account? Can people have as many accounts as they want and contribute to all sides of a conversation and pretend like they're different people? Those types of issues are things that I think a lot about.
That's very interesting, because I don't. So that's a nice, I think it is very important that you do that and that work, but it's an interesting difference. I look more about the plain tool, so to speak. So thanks for that. Fabienne?
If I were to, let's say, review it, when I see consulting, to me, it makes me think of collaboration. And if I think of collaboration, I think collaboration with whom. So I would actually argue like here I expect important people that are going to validate the trust I might put in you. So here is like a social proof, let's say, aspect that is, yes, the important concept, why you're passionate about text, like text is everything and all this. But at some point when I read consulting, I was like, why should I trust this yet unknown person to me? And usually that's social proof, like, oh, they have worked with that super important, super serious either establishment or person or whatnot. So that's an aspect that I would add in there, proof of collaboration with important people, to put it a bit bluntly.
No, well, the original email that I was going to send to Apple was supposed to be based on that. So I think that's very close to where it was surfing. So maybe at the end of this, I put a list of who has endorsed, or shall I just say everybody who's in the book? Come on, call them. I don't know. Thanks for that, Mark.
I was just responding to your thing about, well, if you were writing, if you were sort of writing for yourself, what you know, what aspect might you draw in? And the thing that I find myself coming back to, in a sense, not by intent, more and more, is the human part of the interface. It's trying to stop over venerating the technology we're building and making it work for us rather than us work for it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of, okay, yeah, good point. David?
One thing that that I've come about relatively recently, actually someone turned me on to it, and I've really incorporated it into my thinking around annotation and other ways of augmenting web pages, is this notion of stigmergy, which is what ants do, where they leave traces in the environment. So they're actually communicating indirectly through the environment. So they don't actually talk to each other, but yet they're able to exploit food sources and create amazing hives and nests. And so I don't know, I've just found it that people really relate to this. You know, first of all, people like biomimicry, and they know what ants are, and they've seen ants in long lines, and they've seen nests and everything. And so it actually, I found it very helpful to explain the value of annotation. And you know, I don't know, maybe it's something that could be useful.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think of text itself as being a kind of stigmergy at some point. You know, we don't write necessarily to another person. We put it on the bookshelf and see who reads it. So I think that's a really interesting thing. But thank you. That's given me a lot to think about. But in terms of us, you know, so we're still going to be looking at the media. I'm going to try to find a date for the Future of Text. We're going to maybe do it in Norway. We'll see later on what the appetite is for that. Going to try to organize a demo day in the not too distant future. And what is the goal of this year? Is it another book? And if so, is it going to be a cooler kind of book? Obviously, I will release a relatively standard book with visual meta no matter what. But if there are other thoughts we can do in addition, you know, that's cool.
I continue to be excited about the possibility of an online book that can be annotated, that we can build upon.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so I've been blogging on WordPress.liquid.info for a couple of decades, and last year I got hacked. I haven't been using it for a while, and last week I found out that someone has been using it to post spam on Goodreads. I deleted those messages by the spammer. It turns out all my messages are gone. The backups are gone. So my appetite for storing things on the web it remains zero. I think the web is one of humanity's greatest inventions, absolutely. But it is a current medium, and it really needs to have deep roots elsewhere as well. So when it comes to annotations, I think annotations are useful, but personally, the whole hypothesis, I think, is a bit, like I've said before, I would really like to read Mark Anderson's annotations and what he's reading, because we're in the same field and I trust him. It's like choosing a DJ on YouTube. And so I'd very much like to rediscover that and talk about how to do that. But, you know, the issue before annotation is how to store our stuff. And like these discussions we have here, they kind of disappear. But yeah.
Well, to try and pull those threads sort of together, and I don't have a sort of polished view on this, but one thing to consider if going down the sort of book route is to maybe encourage people to write, but within we'll set some rails this time. Say write about things that have been in the previous versions of the book. So let's do some resectioning, which is sort of annotation coming from a slightly different direction.
That's clever. So you're saying in the author guidance, we say, try to find 1 or 2 previous articles to refer to.
Yes, and whether you, I mean, in a sense of whether you agree or so, but just in a sense, go back, see what's there, or even if worst case, critique yourself. But I hope people wouldn't be quite so self-referential. Yeah, just go and look at it. You know, what did you understand? What didn't you understand? What's opened your mind to an aspect of sort of textual use you didn't know? And this is a way, you know, this is a sort of slow form of annotation. So perhaps that, you know, that gets you slightly to the sort of goal, and, you know, so that's what, you know, David was saying. So this wouldn't be as dynamic as something necessarily online, but also it might just allow you to have a bit closer direction of what people might do. Now, whether you'll get people to play by those rules, I don't know, because it's like herding cats. If the last couple of years are anything to go by.
I think that's clever. I think you know, obviously citations are. Hang on a second. Actually, I'm going to share screen because this is a really good point. Sorry, I was trying to do what you guys said. If we go to this front page here, I say I work to make text better connected and more interactive, right? So better connected, I start talking about the issues of citations. You know, that is definitely, you know, I talk about connections because the web in itself is just rubbish, but then citations currently are quite rubbish too. As you have shown me in articles, Mark, people don't really check citations. People don't really follow them. This is insane. And this is why I'm paying the Liquid team to do research, and Brandel, bad on Apple for this, to be able to add a feature to Reader that all Reader does is know one folder. And if you have a document that cites a document and in Visual Meta it knows the name of the document, then it will open it if it's in that folder, which should be such an obvious and basic thing. But because of, you know, Apple security thing, that's why I'm half jokingly saying bad Apple, you know, to make this difficult. The point is, Mark, just following connections. There's so much work that can be done just in that one single thing.
Well, I would have thought, but David.
Well,
Oh, really quickly, I just wanted to make it clear to you all, so you kind of just know where I stand. In terms of annotations, I'm most interested in what I call a bridge, which is connecting two ideas with a relationship. And I feel like connecting, you know, it could be a piece of text to a segment of a video with a relationship, like contradicting or supporting. My sense is that you turn information into knowledge by connecting two ideas. So that's really, when I say annotations, I'm more interested in that than notes. And I wanted you all as a group to understand that that's kind of my constitution.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Did I cut Brando? Were you going to say something when I said to David to go ahead? Or
Well, I didn't put my hand up, but is it gone? No, that's good. Whatever it wasn't important enough for me to hold on to.
I mean, it's interesting you talking citations. Something I'm in the midst of at the moment, working on a paper for hypertext, is referencing a lot of systems. So, for instance, wrestling with, well, do I, if I want to talk about, I don't know, for the sake of example, something like Rome research, which I don't think has actually been used in a cited paper. In other words, there is, and this is an interesting conundrum, because you might write this paper and Rome research may get to the bottom of their money pit at the end of this year and disappear forever. And you won't be able to go and look up Rome research. Well, it might be in the Internet Archive. Whereas interestingly, if you can tack it to a published paper, even if it's, because from that, I found what you can often do is from a paper, you can then mine out to find other things from it that may or may not last. Because especially as time goes by, in the moment, you can't conceive that this, Facebook's around, it's going to be around forever, isn't it? Well, probably not. And it won't appear as though it's about to die until very close to the extinction event. And it's actually having things to reference to, and that, and we were talking, I think just you started the recording, about how a large amount of papers relating to spatial hypertext just winked out of existence because someone at Texas A&M turned off a subdomain of their server. As it happens, luckily the stuff is on the Internet Archive, but I think that's more by luck than judgment. And so in that sense, that's why the citations are, to my mind, are important. I mean, because they're actually a pain in the bum to do, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think what I was going to follow up on was the sort of the nature of citations and the nature of attention, and the reality is that what would happen to your reader if they did follow every single citation is that the flow and the continuity of this message that you had would be absolutely obliterated. So there's a tacit sort of like, trust me, this is where I got it from. This is what I'm thinking about. Please don't follow that link. Please don't do that. This is, like if you've ever read like the book with no pictures, that sort of narrative of like if you were trying to teach a 9-year-old to read an academic paper and that link was actually as forthcoming, it'd be like, no, that what they're saying is not, don't read that right now. Just know that it's there in case you want to. I know you do want to follow it right now, but please just come on. Let's get back to the. No, come on. All right. Just this one more, and then we're going to go and we're going to read the whole thing, and then we can list all of the stuff that we want. Like, so there's a conflict intrinsically in that. One of the things that I would hope that an automated system, an adequately automated system, would be able to provide is enough proof that at least something exists. But it's hard to know what kind of demonstration somebody would need in order to be able to see that. There's a leftist YouTuber, Sean, who just posted about a PragerU video. Dennis Prager is a right-wing sort of authoritarian sympathizer who puts videos up and misrepresented several articles about fatherhood for the benefit of making a ultimately uncontroversial but sort of aggressive point about the nature of fatherhood himself. And it just wouldn't take a lot for anybody to have done the work that Sean did on this video of following the sources to where they actually were, to one, characterize what they were and what they weren't. There was not an article in Atlantic, it was in monsterbaby.com or something like that. Very much a second or third or fourth tier affiliate site that happens to be plausibly the Atlantic at this point. And the point was not actually that fathers aren't necessary. There was a specific semantic kind of bit that the author was doing in order to characterize the difference between what he considered fathers and dads, and the ultimate. And so, like, in terms of an automated system, that has the ability to provide like a representation of that, that's hard. That's a very hard thing to do in the context of somebody being able to come up with a system wherein it's not possible for somebody to misrepresent. So, like, what I guess my question when in relation to citations is like, what concretely, in terms of deadly pragmatic action, would you expect a user's action to be, if any, in the context of these things? And I think that it's a little harder because of how simple the actual palette of actions a user actually has than we tend to think.
I have to jump on that one because when we're talking about following, this is Brandel, I'm giving your brain back to you, okay? This is the thing. When you look outside at an oak tree, you don't follow every vein, but you instantly get a shape of the tree, where it's leaning. So this is just a perfect example of XR. I don't think Mark and I are saying that every link should be clicked on. It's absolutely not what we're saying. And what you were saying, the example of this link should not be followed, is really important. Previous language would have called that a link type. So we are citing Hitler, but that does not mean we condone what Hitler said. That's a link type. We're citing this research for being wrong because its citation tree just goes stupid. It literally is dumb, to use the correct term, sorry. So to be able to make your own views of the connections known, absolutely crucial. And if you can do that in a basic organized manner, then you can have that oak tree. You open the document and let's simplistically say you turn it around and in a VR shape, there's an actual tree at the back. You can see where the rotten links are, these are dead. And if you wonder what the dead ones are, do they have anything in common? It's a beautiful example because the difference to me, and I know it's obvious to you, but to clarify, a link is a direction to a location. A link is not a link. That's really, really important. That's why you can have a link to a document that doesn't exist or the server is down, right? A citation is a method for identifying something. It's not even it's not even an address. You don't know which library the work might be in. So that's why Doug Engelbart's concepts of high resolution addressing and jumping, addressing and jumping are so important. We need to be able to have a means to describe where something is, and we need to have different means to get to that something. In the real world, we can say, go to 37 Cadogan Crescent, and it means something. We have a postcode as well. We can also say, go down, take a left where that yellow car is parked. And it may only be there for a few minutes. All these means we need to try to have in digital environments. And when we then get to virtual environments, it's compounded by the fact that everything is artificial. Even our owl. Do you like our owl? Sorry, I hope everyone got that reference. And that's where something like visual meta for XR environments is crucial, because you should be able to take knowledge into a white space, collapse it. And that should be really, it shouldn't be owned by Apple, Microsoft, or anybody else. It should be completely open, that these things have been assigned this and they are there. And that's how we should be able to literally live and work in these connected spaces. And when Peter talks about library, of course, partly he talks about a literal library with books on a shelf, of course, but he also talks about you should be able to feel it any way you want. The thing that you and me talked about last week, I think it was Brandon a little bit about, is how when the brain in an infant grows, when the brain cells are connecting, they are smelling their ways to where they should be. That's just absolutely amazing at that stage of formation. So the more we can figure out how these connections can not only be visualized, but experienced, like with the scan, you should be able to do. Anyway, I could go on for literally a week on this topic. Thank you for bringing it up. Over to you, David. I have a feeling you have similar thoughts.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You use the word environment. I know Mark earlier.
Oops.
You were saying you're looking for another word for infrastructure.
We can see each other. We've lost David. Okay. I have to step away
Yeah.
for a second as well. Please hold your
Yeah.
thoughts or continue. Just 1 second, sorry.
So that's interesting. That you're sort of trying to draw a distinction between like the a citation's not meant to be followed. What do you do with it then? Like in academic parlance, is it something that you just collect a list of things that you're interested in after you read a paper? Like what purpose does it serve other than the assertion that something is valid?
I think in the general use, I mean, because there will be some people who are always at the core of these things who have very precise views, but I think for a lot of people, sadly, in the sort of academic industrial complex that has become publish or die, it's a notion of actually what references are, or citations, whichever you call them, are enough. There is enoughness quotient, and that devalues everything, because basically you will be told there aren't enough. Or, you know, or a reviewer too will say, you haven't cited any of my papers. And there's all sorts of stupidity that goes on. But stepping back from it, there is a difference. You might, for instance, reference a particular book or a particular method or a particular tool. And it might be useful to some readers to know what it is and to find out more about it. So in that sense, it's a bit like when you're reading a long form book on, say, a scientific subject, where there are a lot of endnotes, which aren't necessarily tightly coupled to the source, but they're just saying, look, in talking about this, I drew from here. But there may well be things, and I hopefully they wouldn't be a vast number, because going to your point about attention span, I mean, if there are vast numbers, maybe you need to reconsider the structure, but there isn't a way to sort of indicate to people that these are things you probably do want to look up if you don't already know them. And it occurs to me that in the way that people are thinking about having, I think it's medical sciences are now getting into having structured abstracts. In effect, they're sort of, you know, machine readable abstracts. So that was probably the provocation for doing it, but it's an interesting idea in terms of having some structure. I think it would be useful to have an agreed mechanism to indicate very deliberate close referencing, but not to turn everything into a link type, because that happened in about 1987 when Randy Trigg wrote his thesis on link types, and everyone threw their wax pencils in the air and said, we're not doing that, you know, we haven't time. I haven't the time or the interest to decide on what every link I make is. But I do think there's some sense of saying, well, let's sort of do that, but let's have a couple of sort of reserved ideas. So if you're writing about the subject you're in, often there's almost an expectation you'll say, you know, first the dinosaurs came and then this, and you'll have a reference to dinosaurs, you have a reference to thing, because if you don't put it in there, someone will complain that you didn't refer to it. I think it's stupid, but it's how the thing rolls. So I sort of see those almost as nonce references. They'll just be put in all the time. And you wouldn't expect most people who are reading certainly an academic paper, if they needed to read that, well, maybe, you know, maybe they're a bit further from the field than they thought. But then again, you might be coming across from a different field and you might want that. So that's the sort of justification. I don't know if that helps any.
Interesting, thank you.
Did you all hear anything that I said earlier, or did it just cut out immediately?
It seemed like halfway through.
Okay, so we got to the environments and link types. Yeah,
We got
okay.
the word environment.
Oh, okay. I was simply
Okay.
saying that I think, Mark, you were saying an alternative word for infrastructure, and Freud mentioned environment. It's also a word that I use. I don't say I'm building infrastructure. I say I'm building environments. I think it's I don't know why I like it better, but anyway, then link types, I wanted to just mention, Freud, that that's what I meant when I say relationship. I think that link type is very much highly related. No pun intended. When you were just speaking, this notion that the author has to has to know what the link type would be. And, that being a burden, I really think it's important to decentralize links. And once again, not really links, but really bridges from idea to idea, so that we allow, because the author isn't going to know everything, right? You have a piece of content, let's say it's a paragraph, or let's say it's an image or a part of an image, a segment of a video. Within your community there, or let's say our community, there'd be a lot of different people who could point to different morsels of information on other pages. And if they actually did that, I think that they could be motivated potentially to create the link type. Whereas relying on the author to link all the relevant information, I guess that just relegates you to do citations. I think there's a lot more linking of information that can be relevant than just citations. Citations are like, they're the foundation of this, but they're just one use case of linking information. And then I wanted to say that when I'm thinking about building environments, I think it's really important that they're attention triggering, so that you really only see these links on steroids, these precise links that go to specific morsels of information. You only see them when you focus your attention. And I don't mean necessarily your eyes, but really your digital attention as measured by your cursor or your touch or whatever. So like I'm reading a blog or something, and as I'm going, if I really want some more information about this paragraph, if I move my cursor near it and there's additional information, additional ideas on other pages that are related to what I'm looking at, then it tells me, okay, there's 3 different pieces of information, or there's 30 pieces of information, or there's 99 pieces of information that are related to exactly what I'm looking at. And I really think it's important.
No, go on, after you're done.
Okay, I was going to say, I think it's really important, this notion of morsels, which I don't usually use that term, but it's just happening today. But like small pieces of information, that's the problem with citations, especially if they don't put in the pages. If they just cite a link, oh my God, that could be 20, 30, 100 pages. And like Brandon was saying, yeah, that totally can take someone off. But what if really you're just citing one idea? That could be one sentence, one paragraph, or one section of something. I think there's this opportunity to show people progressively more information based on their idea of going deeper and deeper into something, as opposed to, oh, look at the entire document. And then the last thing I'll say is that Brandel, you were talking about how, giving people links can take them out of the progression of actually reading what the author said. And I think that's totally 100% valid. And that's why I like attention triggering, because you can stay within that author flow, but then, get morsels of information to enhance understanding. And also I just want to recognize that there's also non-sequential reading. And, a great example of that would be The Future of Text. I would never expect anyone to necessarily go through that book from start to finish. I would expect them more to kind of pick things out and topics out and kind of based on their interest, go through it. So yeah, no, those are my thoughts.
When you talk about pieces of information, I think that is an interesting position, because yes, as you hang on, Egga's coming to say hi. It is very important to be able to link to smaller pieces. Doug called it high resolution addressability. Some kind of blogging is important. I'm just wary of leaving everything on the network. Egga, did you want to say anything?
I've got this card.
Do you want to show quickly?
I found this one in the road, and this football card in the library, and this a little book token.
So are these pieces of knowledge?
Yes, but this one is real.
What is that? It's a book token, and yes, you see?
I can buy.
I hope
a
Peter's here. He
laptop.
can look at the library.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I mean, yeah, these are just important issues. And
Troy, when you say you're wary of keeping the information on the web or the internet, what tell me those concerns. Remind me.
link rot, domains going down, servers going down, that kind of stuff. Also, a lot of early hypertext research isn't available. And I think you were dropped off when I talked about how my blog for about 15 years is completely gone. Someone hacked it, and apparently the backup wasn't running in the right type of thing, even though I pay for my own server. That kind of stuff. I have absolutely no problem with everything being online while in manuscript / in authoring form. But I think that once we publish something to the world, and by publish, I just mean make public, it should have the opportunity to, not every single thing, but it should have the opportunity for a more robust storage. By robust, I mean accessible in 500 years. I mean accessible to a technical person who has no idea what we're doing. And, and as open and robust as possible in every single way. It's so easy to make a demo, but it can also be very ephemeral.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I'm once again thinking about environments, and as I'm working on this notion of bridging, we're considering the possibility of archiving the different ideas. So if someone is bridging from a sentence here to a segment of a video, in the ideal world, you would, if not archive those entire pages, at least archive the pieces of information that are being bridged. I think it's more important. It's better to probably archive the entire page. It gets a little complex when you're talking about audio and video, obviously, just because of the heaviness of those mediums. But the Wayback, we could work in conjunction with the Wayback Machine. I don't know how well they do the video and the audio, but they certainly could be one way of archiving. And then the other way that comes to mind is these digital ledgers like blockchain, et cetera, or Arweave, I think is really interesting. They claim that you can archive content. Is relatively inexpensive. They say it will never go away. So 500 years should work. I don't know. But I mean, are you also thinking that it needs to be pulled off of the web and needs to be something that is in a physical form so that it exists even if the web goes down? And
we have Randall here who used to work on the Apple websites. And I think a good way of looking at the web is as a storefront. It is there and it communicates what it needs to, and then it changes. And a normal storefront disappears, and it can be archived in different ways. I have, for this website that I've updated to try to, get some work, I've had domains die, and I link to original Wayback on there. But I'm talking about, this is the future of text communities. So of course we use video, we're doing it right now. And of course we use a lot of other things. But I think a lot of our knowledge can be stored effectively as text. And, we shouldn't lose sight of that. And it should be in a format where, end of the world, zombies are coming, you have a book, you run into the woods and you can still read it, type of thing.
Yeah, what's really interesting with what you just said is like storing videos as text. In the future, it's very possible that someone will be able to really reconstruct something very much like the original video, just from the text. And it's partially, they're doing that now, right, with generative AI, but it'll get better and better and better, and it might be able to even not only do the talking head, but also do some of the background graphics as well. That would be part of a generative video from text that's been stored because we weren't able to store all the videos.
And that's a huge discussion. And I think we move to Mark on, since we have just a few minutes left. But yeah, fair point.
I very quickly say it's an interesting thing you say about videos and things, because I'm reminded that often, of certainly, well, a few conferences I go to, that one of the reasons for going is that the talks, apart from the master student who's going to read their paper in a monotone, is that the talk is quite different from the paper. It touches on the paper, but it brings it alive. The narrative is. And the situating of the core of the paper is almost much better. Anyway, that's by the by. I had one provocation for you, Fred, in terms of things to try, is thinking what we were saying about the relevance of different links. As you have a tool, and therefore you have control over it. I mean, one thing to experiment is sort of in what ways might we better indicate the purpose of a thing that we're linking to, in the sort of referential citational sense. And I don't pretend to have an answer to it. And I'm very conscious that just forcing everyone to devote yet more effort to sort of, trying to put a fine tuning on the intent of every link is not going to fly. But it's things like, for instance, if you did have information on some or all of the links in a document, what could you do in the way of how those are visualized? Some people hate, some people change the CSS, so when they read a web page, they can't see any links because they find it visually disturbing. That's probably one extreme end. But we as a whole, we need to consider those things. So if you think that you control a viewing environment in something like Reader.
Well, I mean, I think we can take a lot.
Show?
I think we can take a lot of inspiration from HyperCard. Cards that you can address and link to and stuff. Of course, that was a tiny environment, so in a sense it's easy to idolize it now. But don't forget, when Steve Jobs went to Xerox PARC, a lot of what he gained was ignorance. They saw things that they thought was a lot more advanced, so they thought it existed. So if we idolize HyperCard and don't do too much research on what it was, maybe we can get to something amazing. That's just an inspiration thought. Peter?
Yeah, one of the things I really loved about HyperCard was its notion of the different levels. So you could just be at like the painting level, or you could be at the usage level, the content creation level. You could be all the way down at the open up objects and play with the internal scripts level. So I think that's a really useful thing to build into our interfaces.
Yeah, and the thing is, one of the points when I showed my site earlier, and Fabienne was saying, I need more examples to show what you're talking about. It is exactly what you talk about there. And I think that is also what David was talking about, different levels of reveal, so to speak. And finding ways to do that where, okay, give me the highlights, as they say, is very easy. I try to do that with bolds and headings. And then, the main message has to be there. And supportive information is a link. Links are pretty crap interface-wise. They are ugly, they are underlined. Thank God they don't have to be blue anymore and purple. Which is one thing, but the last few minutes of our chat today, if we can find better ways to help people do the accordion folding, unfolding in an open way. And by the way, the reason I use the word infrastructure and not environment, I see environment as being infrastructure plus capabilities on top. So for instance, when you work in Author, I would call that an environment, an Author and Reader an environment. But the infrastructure, I just mean the bit that is literally the rails the train can go on. So it is a bit hardcore in the sense also against what you said, Mark. And of course, we should look at all levels. By the way, can you guys please briefly have a look at the page? I just put the link. If you have any major comments, I'd like to hear them before I let go of your brilliant brains.
I'm not sure what's different.
I've added why me, why now, and I've tied it up a little bit higher up. So it's the why me and why now that's really new.
Works for me.
What, Peter? You're giving me a job? Awesome.
Ah,
Well, I'll have to win Lotto first.
Okay, we can arrange that.
I did like before when you had the reference to Vint and some other, I don't know who the other people were, they weren't familiar to me, but I think that just, saying that you are respected, your work is respected by a father of the internet probably is something that Apple would resonate with. So I don't see that.
Well, he sent a message to Tim Cook, and I haven't heard back. He hasn't heard back. But see, on the site, I have references. I have Adam Chire saying augmented text tools are essential components for textual thought productivity, which is lovely. Bruce Horn has comments. So I have they're kind of in the sites. So and the thing is, the whole site is the pitch. So nobody would go straight to the consult page. It would be, you go to the first page and there's Vint. And if you look at the picture, there's quite a few other people of note there.
Okay. Got it.
So
Okay.
that's how I'm trying to juggle it.
I see. Yes. Yes, I understand. Okay. By the way, there's a big space here below the search, which could have a quote, maybe potentially from someone. Not necessary, but it's empty space. So it doesn't have to be filled.
Yeah, depending on the size of the real estate that you're expecting people to look at it on. The one thing that I would say is that you want to be conscious of how little time people are going to look at this for, as well. And that's not necessarily where it's sort of inversely proportionate to their importance. Sometimes there will be a very important look at it by a relatively unimportant person who is also quite naive, and they need to decide to forward it on to somebody who is more important or bless it and things. One of the things that I didn't realize when I was conducting interviews on behalf of Apple was that there was a veritable army of people screening things before they even came across my desk. And so there are a lot of ways of reading, and so if politeness and being demure about things isn't helpful, because the nuance that you would expect to be able to carry on a conversation in a civilized club context is not the same as what you need to do for somebody who is being honestly underpaid to be responsible for passing things up the chain to the people who are important ought to have. So be conscious of how little attention and legibility or familiarity people have as well, so that even the most naive person takes a look at it and goes, "Oh my God, such and such a person needs to know about this."
Okay.
Yeah, building on that. Yeah, I see that Vint is mentioned on this front page, but I personally probably would put a quote in the space in the lower left from him, a very short one, obviously, because you don't have much space, because people's attention is so short. I mean, that is just the bottom line. Yeah.
Yeah. I would also say most people don't know who Vint is. Just about nobody I've ever met in Apple knows who Vint Cerf is. That he very plausibly was at least the co-inventor of the TCP/IP. That is not lost on them when I say it, but they wouldn't recognize it. And most people I've met also, even very smart and theory sort of focused people, believe that Engelbart invented the mouse rather than even the whole mother of all demos. That seems to have caught on in some HCI courses and things like that. And it's like, no, look harder. So so two things. He often credited it to Bill English, but also what he invented was not the mouse. so yeah.
Bill English was the one who built the wooden box and put it in. But it was in trials, they did knee controls and all, and pointers and all that stuff. The mouse was actually invented when Doug was at a conference and he was bored. standing along the wall and thinking, hang on, if we put two wheels at an angle, those two pieces of information can control what they call the bug. But anyway, he got really annoyed when people were referring to that as being his contribution. So yeah, your point is very clear.
So clarify the significance of people upfront and easily with whatever sort of parlance that people will be confluent within, and that'll go a long way. And make sure that it reads to even the most. And there will be some people who are disinterested. There's some people who will be too panicked to really understand what they're reading. You know, all sorts of things. So cover all of those cases, and you'll be golden.
Okay, please have a look at the main page. I have added below where it's talking about the advisors saying who they are. Does that help? Yes?
So can you really
Okay, I can.
Next. So can you please
I'm in what's called a meeting.
please
Look at all these people.
please can you put a hook in here until it goes down?
Okay. This is a really cool new toy, by the way. It's a ball and you throw it hard and it becomes a robot. Rah. Okay, did it.
Yeah, that's better. Much better. Helped me.
Should I bold the names?
That wouldn't bother me. That would help me see it or see them earlier. See them easier, actually.
Do I need a woman on here?
That'd be great.
Should I ask Barbara maybe if she wants to be an official advisor? She is quite
I mean,
brilliant.
Barbara,
Sorry, yes?
Wendy is also fairly important. I mean, you would need to tell people who she is, but
I'm not putting Wendy on here. She gave me a scholarship, invited me to do a PhD. It got so bad that I drove from London to the Christmas party a few years ago in Southampton, saw Wendy and turned around in the door and drove straight back to London. Hang on, let me just pause the video.